What's up, everybody? Welcome to lesson number 8 in this liquidity providing series. I hope you have enjoyed the previous 7 lessons. We are almost done with this series. So strap on in because today we are talking about Balancer. And more specifically, we are talking about the PHUX fork of Balancer on Pulse Chain. So this is a little bit different. We've mostly talked about V2 and V3 styles of liquidity and all of the important metrics around that. But this is a very, very different style of liquidity providing that I think is important for you guys to know and understand in terms of knowing what your options are for when you're looking to provide liquidity. So let's dive on it. So Balancer V2 / PHUX. I'm going to mostly be talking within the context of the PHUX DEX. Because that's probably the most relevant to those of us on Pulse Chain and those of you guys watching this video. So yeah. So an overview, the Balancer forks and the PHUX DEX, what their main two differences between that style of liquidity and V2, V3 style liquidity is that a single liquidity pool can have more than 2 tokens. Specifically on the PHUX DEX, it can, I believe, have up to 8 tokens all at once. And you can customize the pool ratios. So with a V2 DEX and a V3 DEX, you could only have 2 tokens within a liquidity pool. V2, 0 to infinity, X times Y equals K. V3, concentrated liquidity, but it's still only with 2 tokens, although you can customize the ratios depending on where price is in your liquidity bands. But with the PHUX DEX, you can have a variety of different ratios, 50-50, 80-20, 33-33-33, maybe even have like 4 where it's like 85, 5, 5, 5. It could be completely whatever you want. And that completely changes the game in terms of impermanent loss and your risk profile when providing liquidity. One big thing about these customized ratio pools and having more than 1 token on a DEX is that your risk of impermanent loss actually can be reduced in these unbalanced pools. And a lot of the reason why this is because if you have a higher percentage of one coin in a pool, it's more like you're just holding that single token. So, for example, an 80-20 pool, you would have much less impermanent loss than a 50-50 pool because only 20% of your entire position, or I guess only 40% of your entire position is in like a 50-50 split. And then the other 60% is essentially, you can think of it like on its own. And I'll show you some numbers on exactly how that impermanent loss works in a little bit. For PHUX, there is an incentive token, and it's the same with Balancer, that is given to liquidity providers for certain pools that are incentivized. And so with the PHUX token on PHUX, you can get boosted yield by providing liquidity with the PHUX token. So I just want to go over how that works really quickly because those mechanisms are important for choosing the pool that you want to provide liquidity in on the PHUX DEX. And the way you get that boosted liquidity is by taking that PHUX incentive token, pairing it in liquidity in this specific pool called Prime PHUX. And it's an 80-20 pool where 80% of the tokens are the PHUX tokens and 20% is in the Pulse Chain, Pulse Chain tokens. And so once you provide liquidity, you then lock your LP tokens, and then you're given a receipt that's called VE-PHUX. The more VE-PHUX you have, the more boosted yield you get. And the way it works is that you can get up to 2.5x on your liquidity, on your yield farming incentive rewards when you have the VE-PHUX. Generally, how it works is if you have 1% of the VE-PHUX pool, you can earn 2.5x returns on up to 1% on all of your other pools. So let's say, for example, you have 2% of the total VE-PHUX pool. You can, and you have, let me take a step back. Let's say you have 1% of the total VE-PHUX pool that exists, and you have 2% liquidity in another pool. Well, 1% of that 2% of your liquidity earns 2.5%, and that other 1% on top of it earns just 1x, so the base rate. So if you average that out, that's about a 1.27x total boosted liquidity on this deck. So the ideal strategy is to, if you have 1% VE-PHUX, is to provide liquidity up to 1% of all of those pools in all of the other LP pools. Another important thing to note is that not all liquidity pools are incentivized. So the incentivization is structured by the DAO, which also is controlled by the VE-PHUX holder. So every voting period, they vote on which pools get the rewards that are the PHUX emissions. And that changes, I think, every like 10 to 14 days, something along those lines. So that APR changes, but you want to typically choose pools that are more incentivized than not because you're earning a higher APR. Now, one cool thing about the liquidity pools on the PHUX DEX is that I like to call them like pseudo index funds. They're not really index funds, but they kind of act like it. And the reason why is because you're holding more than one token in these liquidity pools, and typically those tokens are related to each other. So we have like a couple tokens here: the Bridge Stablecoin pool, Prime PHUX, RH Maxi, the Hedron pool, and the Maximus Perps pool. And what's really cool is that when you provide liquidity in the RH Maxi pool, you are holding all of these tokens at the same time. And so all of these tokens can be swapped with each other. You can go from Pulse to PHEX, Pulse to EHEX, PulseX to Pulse, whatever it might be. And these are the ratios by which you're providing that liquidity on. So in this pool, it's 40% Pulse, 25% PulseX, 20% PHEX, 10% EHEX, and 5% Ink. What's cool about this is that you're getting price exposure to all of these assets because you're holding all of them in a liquidity pool. If you were to do this in a typical V2 or V3 style position, you would need to have separate liquidity positions with all of these different pools. On the balancer fork, PHUX, you can have all of this existing within one liquidity pool. Now, there is a permanent loss between these tokens, but it's a little less drastic, and the impermanent loss is within all of these tokens. It's kind of spread out across all 5 of these tokens. So that's really important. But you're going to capture the price appreciation, or at least a decent amount of the price appreciation of all of these tokens, especially as we talked about in our Hart's Law lesson, because they're all bonded in liquidity, both because of this pool, but also all of these tokens are bonded in liquidity on all the other DEXs. You're going to get a decent amount of the price action because all of them are going to be moving together. Now, one thing I really like about balancer forks is that it gives tokens like Hedron and the Maximus Perps a really big advantage in that because there are multiple tokens in these ecosystems, and I think the Maximus DAO Perps, it really shines with this group of tokens. In a V2 and V style liquidity, you would need pools for each one of these tokens relative to each other. So like Maxi Deci, Maxi Lucky, Maxi Base, Maxi Trio, and everything else to have good order execution across all of them. And that can be really hard because not many of these tokens exist based on how they were created. But with the PHUX DEX, what you can do is what you can do is put them all in the same liquidity pool. So now you can swap between any of these tokens, and the order efficiency is proportional to the amount of liquidity in them. So what might have been spread out, say there's like $100,000, so $500,000 of liquidity total across all of these assets. Well, they might have been split up into multiple liquidity pools that had like $5,000, $15,000, $20,000 of liquidity. But with this Maximus Perps Maxi pool, what you're able to do is conglomerate all of that liquidity into one singular pool, so that the order execution efficiency is at its maximum across these different tokens. And that's really, really important because the Maximus Perps had a little bit of a problem in that there wasn't that much liquidity across some of the more exotic ones like Trio to Deci or like Trio to Base. But now because we have this Maximus Perps Maxi LP pool on the PHUX DEX, you are able to swap between these assets much more effectively. And we see this advantage to a little bit lesser extent, but to a similar extent with the Hedron tokens with their P and E version. So like P Hedron, P Icosa, E Hedron, E Icosa, as well as with Hex in here. So I like these tokens as like kind of a way to DCA a little bit, where it's like I don't really know which of the RH tokens I want to buy right now, but I want to get exposure to the ecosystem. Well, this pool is a way that you can do it while also earning a little bit of income on the side. Now, I want to also talk about the reduced impermanent loss factor. So this graph is taken from the Balancer white paper, and what it shows is the projected impermanent loss for different weightings of LP pools. Now, these are only with two token pools in this graph, but the concept, I believe, also applies to multiple tokens at the same time. So if you'll notice, this blue line here is 50-50, and this is your normal impermanent loss kind of trajectory if you just provided like V2 liquidity with like Hex and Pulse, for example. And so the x-axis is the relative price change, and the y-axis is impermanent loss. So like 95.95 impermanent loss means that you've taken a 5% hit via impermanent loss. And so if we go and look at the 3x relative price change, that 50-50 pool has gotten about 85 to 87%, 0.85 impermanent loss, 0.87. So that's like 15 to 13% impermanent loss. But as we go up the weightings and we started to weight the pool more and more towards one token, you'll notice that impermanent loss is decreasing. So in the 80-20 pool, it's closer to 5% impermanent loss, and in the 95-5 pool, it's almost like you haven't experienced any impermanent loss at all. So if you found a pool in here that was really heavily weighted towards one token and was incentivized, that's a really advantageous position. And there actually is one on the PHUX DEX. It's the PLSX single-sided staking pool, where it's about, I believe, 95% or 90% PulseX, 5% stables, and 5% prime PHUX. So you're able to basically hold 90% PulseX and earn an APY on it, which is almost like holding the position liquid. And the impermanent loss if PulseX starts to skyrocket relative to stable coins and relative to the PHUX token is fairly minimal. So that's almost like having a liquid PLSX position while also earning in the PHUX token on the side. So the general gist with balancer forks is that you can hold multiple assets in a single pool. You can also hold various ratios of those assets in a single pool. And by increasing the weighting of one token over the others, as well as increasing the number of tokens, you start to mitigate your impermanent loss risk while also earning an APR. And the APR that's most of the APR that's earned on these DEXs, on this specific DEX, the PHUX DEX, is from the PHUX emissions that are dictated by the PHUX DAO that's voting on it on a bi-monthly basis, or about every 2 weeks. And so what you want to do, you want to find tokens that you want to hold in the first place. Then you want to see if those tokens correspond to a pool that is incentivized on the PHUX DEX. And then you'll provide liquidity and earn that boosted fee. Not earn the boosted fee, but you will earn an APY associated with the PHUX token. And if you stake the PHUX token, get prime PHUX, stake that to get PHUX, you'll get a boosted reward on top of that as well. There's some pretty cool protocols coming down the line on Pulse Chain that are going to build on top of the PHUX DEX that I'm not going to talk about here, but if you go on my channel, I actually just did a stream not too long ago with the founder of one of these protocols, and so you can learn all about that. But first, you definitely want to understand how Balancer works and kind of like what are the strategies in order to maximize your APY in these pools. So multiple tokens, multiple weightings, incentivization via the PHUX token, the incentive token, and then locking up tokens in an LP pool gets you boosted rewards. That's pretty much all you need to know. That's like the general 101 of Balancer. There are a lot more intricacies behind it, especially pairing LP tokens with other LP tokens, but that's a little beyond the scope of this video series. I just want to get you guys the basics so that you understand what's going on when you go on the DEX and when you're trying to decide, hey, like, should I do a V2 on PulseX? Should I do a V3 on 9mm? Like, you're not really sure what exactly you're doing. Not what exactly you're doing, but you're not exactly sure where to go. I want to make sure that when you are going to the balancer forks like PHUX, you understand what the value proposition is and that you're able to make an educated decision based on that. If you have any questions about this DEX, leave it in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe as always. And don't forget, there are free 15-minute calls down in the description box if you have further questions on this concept. That is all. And we are going to the last episode in this series, the liquidity providers end game. This is going to wrap up all the concepts into one, and I hope you guys like it a lot. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.